History can be intriguing. It can whitewash villains and crucify heroes. It all has to do with perspectives. To some people, Gaddafi was a hero for his latter years' Pan-Africanism activities. In same spirit of Pan-Africanism, the former Libya leader is a villain to some people for his role in disposing Burkina Faso hero Thomas Sankara. Such is the story of Madame Tinubu, a cruel slave merchant who became a hero to some people of the Yoruba tribe in Nigeria. She was a shrewd businesswoman and a ruthless slave trader who would rather sink a ship full of slaves than to accept cheap price from her European slave buyers. Despite her atrocities as a slave merchant, she has a statue in Lagos, where her legacy in the struggle for independence from British colonialism is celebrated. Over 200 years ago in the Ojikodo forest of Airboland, Olumusa and his wife Nijid welcomed a baby girl. The baby girl would live from 1810 to 1887 and would become Madame Tinubu, a female slave trader who is celebrated by her Yoruba tribe as a unicorn. She grew up with her grandmother Osundala, who was into the sale of plants and herbal medicine. Madame Tinubu would go into the trading of herbal and plant medicine after losing her husband and breadwinner whom she had 2 sons with. The widow applied the knowledge acquired from her grandmother, who was into herbal medicine, to go about her business. Going about her job as a herbal medicine trader, she met Oba Adeliajo son, the exiled king of Lagos, who was on a visit to Abeokuta. Some historians believed Madame Tinubu used charm on the exiled king to make him fall in love with her. The two would go on to marry in 1833. This marriage set the sail for whatever Madame Tinubu accomplished in her enigmatic life. A villain to some people and a unicorn to others. With her new husband, they moved from Abeokuta to Badagry, which was then the traditional place of refuge for Lagos monarchs. That was when she started riding on her husband's connections and influence to build a formidable business in tobacco, salt, and slaves. In 1835, her husband was reinstated as the King of Lagos, but unfortunately he passed away just 2 years on the throne and was succeeded by his son, Oluwole. Before the demise of her husband, she had already strengthened her trade with the expatriate community, the indigenous population of Lagos and Abeokuta, as well as other communities in Yorubaland. To still hold on to her influence in the palace, she married Yusufu Bada, who was the warlord of the new King of Lagos, Oluwole. When King Oba Oluwole passed away, Madame Tinubu ensured the throne was given to Akitoyi, her brother-in-law. This earned her the title, the Kingmaker. With her influence in Lagos and other parts of Yoruba lands under British rule, she established connection with merchants from Brazil, Portugal and Great Britain. Madame Tinubu got salt, tobacco, cotton, palm oil, coconut oil, and above all, firearms from her trade. She sold slaves to the white merchants for the aforementioned commodities. There was a time she was asked why she sells slaves with no mercy, and she replied she has a large family to feed and needs to sell some of them out for the whites to feed them so she can get enough resources to feed the other ones. Madame Tinubu's name traveled far. In Europe she was known to the merchants as the Queen of Slavery. She was so powerful to the extent that even after the British government abolished slave trade, she found ways to continue with her business with Portuguese and Brazilian slave merchants. In January 1852, the British government, represented by John Beecroft, their consul to the Bight of Benin and Biafra, signed a treaty with the then King of Lagos, Oba Akitoyi, to end slave trade, but this woman didn't respect the treaty. When they came after her, she fled from Lagos to Badagry, where she continued with the slave trade. As of 1855, she was still in the slave trade business and was selling to the Brazilians. In 1856, Benjamin Campbell, the British consul to Lagos, went back to London and heard Madame Tinubu was actually pleading with the British government to allow her sell slaves. The British government tasked Benjamin Campbell to do everything to find her from her hideout in Abeokuta and exile her to Britain to put a stop with her trade with the Brazilians. On Benjamin Campbell's return to Lagos, he couldn't find her and the trade still continued. The firearms she got from the slave trade made her the biggest gun supplier in the territory. At a point in history, many tribal states, including the powerful Dahomey Kingdom, got their guns from her. Madame Tinubu got so rich that she used her money and resources to influence who becomes kings in the various Yoruba tribal states. History has it that once upon a time Madame Tinubu took some slaves to the port to sell to her white partners. The price negotiation didn't click well. The white partners were short of the agreed sum but didn't tell her till she arrived at the port with the slaves. To prove she would rather lose chattel than sell cheaper, Madame Tinubu sold the merchants the number of slaves their money could afford and drowned the rest of the slaves in their presence. Madame Tinubu was a member of the Yoruba tribe, one of the African tribes that lost over 1 million people to the transatlantic slave trade. It's been estimated that about 1.12 million Yoruba people were exported to the New World between the late 16th century and 1867, with about 80% transported between 1780 and 1850. Yet amongst the same Yoruba tribe, a slave trader Tinubu is sometimes celebrated as a unicorn for her influence in trade and traditional governance, the role she played to defend many towns in Egba from Dalme slave raiding activities, and her opposition to British colonial rule in Lagos and by extension all Yoruba lands in present-day Nigeria. At a point in history when Oyo Empire had fallen, all kings across the Yoruba lands were not answerable to a single authority. They did things their own way. There was anarchy. The political instability resulted in many Yoruba civil wars with people from same tribe fighting themselves for control. Neighboring tribal states and kingdoms like New Pe and Dalme raided Yoruba communities and sold many into slavery. The Yoruba people themselves formed many militia groups and joined the slave raiding activities. This was the peak slave trade era for the powerful who could afford guns and militia groups. Today, defenders of Madame Tinubu say she didn't own any slave raiding militia group and that the slaves she sold were prisoners of wars and convicted criminals. Her defenders highlight her Yoruba nationalists' feats like leading a campaign against the Brazilian and Sierra Leonean immigrants in Lagos in 1855 for using their wealth and power against the Lagos King Dosunmu and for subverting the customs of Lagos. They highlight how she stood against the British consul, Benjamin Campbell, even from her hideout in Abeokuta. They talk about how she contributed to the successful defense of the Egba town during the Dalme invasion of 1863, which earned her the title Ayelodi, which means the Queen of Ladies. Madame Tinubu opposed colonial policies in Lagos and was the first woman to play a proactive part in the resistance to British rule. A woman doing this was unheard of in such a patriarchy society. She passed away in 1887 and was buried at Ojikoto Quarters in Abeokuta. The Independence Square in Lagos is named after her. It is the famous Tinubu Square on Lagos Island. It had long been known by that name before the country's independence, but it was renamed Independence Square by the leaders of the First Republic. The woman herself purchased that land from the then Lagos king, Oba Akitoye, in 1851 with proceeds from her trade in slaves and guns. Another of the monument for the legacies of Madame Tinubu is her shrine, located at Ojikoto's compound in Abeokuta North local government. The shrine, which also housed a twin tomb, was reinvented in 2014 during the 125th anniversary of the passing of Tinubu by the Ogun state government. Madame Tinubu's shrine is listed as one of the tourist sites in the state and attracts thousands of visitors annually. Apart from tourists and students who visit for excursions, people visit the shrine to perform atonement and offer sacrifices for their spiritual well-being. The shrine, according to one of the grandsons of the wealthy and powerful woman, Nuruddin Tinubu, who also serves as the priest and custodian of the shrine, was a mud building constructed by Tinubu's mother. Madame Tinubu may be a villain slave trader to many, but some people in her tribe saw her as a unicorn. Calls to pull down her statue in Lagos has always landed in deaf ears. Nigerian filmmaker Fadia Williams Balogun has produced a movie to honor the legacies of Madame Tinubu. The title of the movie is Efunroye, the Unicorn. It has divided opinions. Some see her as a villain slave merchant, others see her as a unicorn. Note that Madame Efunroye Tinubu has no relations with the current president of Nigeria, Ahmed Bola Tinubu. Thanks for your time. Kindly subscribe to the channel for more history, cultural, and tourism contents.